where we're not a divided society, but we're a united society.
Okay, well, let's leave the cliches and historical motherhood references out. What does it actually mean for the Australian economy, for where we are now, some of the difficult issues that create problems in our society?
Well, we can leave some of the historical references out, but it is important that I think people understand what Labor stands for. And Labor fundamentally believes that this society works best when everyone's included, not just the well-off, but those who are more disadvantaged.
So let's turn that into policy. Let's look at some of the issues. Youth unemployment, yesterday the figures were startling, and underemployment even more startling. Do you believe in protectionism? Would you go back to the car industry's gone? What would you go back to? What would you do? Where do you pull those levers?
Well, it's got to be about growth. It's got to be about how we create wealth, and then it's ensuring we have the fair distribution of income. But we've got to have an economy that's creating growth. We've got a couple of shocks underway in the Australian economy. One is the move from mining, investment in mining, to investment in non-mining industries. We also need to make sure that we're a scientific nation, that we're investing in innovation and research. So all of this contributes to the fact that we need to be part of the Asian century.
So why oppose, for instance, a health research fund, which you did? The government wanted to create one, you've blocked it.
Oh, John, you don't pay for future research by taxing people who are currently sick and vulnerable. But going to your key story, which you said, what's Labor think about the economy, think about the future? In a nutshell, if you can do these matters quickly, we're changing from mining. We're seeing minerals prices going down. The Australian economy's got to invest in alternative areas of growth.
Like what?
Well, it has to be in healthcare, in education, in environmental industries, in engaging with Asia,
how do you
in
pay
services.
For these things?
Well, then we get to the area, how do you drive growth full stop? The way we drive growth full stop, in my opinion, is not shatter the confidence of the Australian economy.
You want to put taxes up?
No, well, John, the discussion we're going to have is a bit longer than one-liners, and that's what I think you said in your introduction. Can we get beyond the one-liners? If we accept that the Australian economy is changing, we've had 6 or 7 years of mining boom and now we don't. If you accept that commodity prices are down, the third shock that Australia's having is one which we couldn't have predicted. That is, the government's manufactured a crisis in this country, and they've shattered confidence ever since their unfair budget. So the levers that Labor would pull is that we would invest in our education system. We'd make sure that we had a science-based nation. We wouldn't certainly be holding science and research in this country hostage with threats of cuts, as Christopher Pyne's doing, unless we vote for their unfair changes to higher education.
So how do you pay for all of this is the fundamental question. And confidence was already down under the government you were a part of. The Labor government shattered business confidence. Tony Abbott promised to restore it. He hasn't, just like you're promising to restore it, and it didn't work. So what specifically would you do? Because the government's got, yes, an expenditure problem, but a revenue problem too. So where are the tax increases to pay for all of this going to come from?
Well, again, before I get to the latest question you asked, we've got to talk about what is happening in Australia. If you get that our economy is changing from mining, if you get that we've got the rise of Asia and we should be trying to benefit from that, if you get that the current government's upset the confidence of the nation, you then look at what are the levers that government can pull, and that's the heart of your question. One is we must invest in science and innovation. Two, we must make sure that we've got an education system which is providing lifelong learning, from childcare through to schools, through to higher ed and TAFE.
You're at risk of repeating yourself. I'm asking you to explain how you pay for all of these things and the infrastructure that the increasingly growing fast cities desperately need.
Well, you go to the next lever. If education's one lever that the national government can help pull to make this country grow, because I believe that if you invest in people's minds and let people fulfil their own potential, then they will find those economic opportunities that's so necessary to growth. But then you get to infrastructure. We do need more infrastructure in this country. We need a national infrastructure market where people can invest in infrastructure projects in the future with the certainty that infrastructure is not politicised, the choices and the projects which are being suggested by national governments are ones which stack up in a cost-benefit analysis. So there's infrastructure, then there's education, and then there's proper investment in science. These are economic prescriptions as well as being things which are good for our quality of life.
But until they're turned into reality, they're slogans. So how do you pay for it? Everyone says they want to depoliticise infrastructure. That's just code for saying I want infrastructure that looks after my backers.
No, that's too cynical, John.
Well, what are you proposing to depoliticise infrastructure?
Well, I think one of the big challenges in infrastructure is getting agreement on what are the projects which are sustainable, what are worth the support of taxpayer dollars. You have an independent Infrastructure Australia. That's something that Labor did set up. The current government has bypassed, I believe, Infrastructure Australia, and we're back to this debate which, you quite rightly criticise, where different partisan interests say we want this project or that project. Get the experts, free them up from day-to-day politics, have a transparent business case which everyone can investigate, everyone can see. And if you've got a transparent business case, then investors will be confident to back in infrastructure. And by infrastructure, I mean it could be roads, it could be rail. The point about it is that if we're going to have taxpayer support and private investment, we've got to make sure that our infrastructure is not just done with an eye towards winning a particular electorate in the next election.
But in fact, if you're concerned about confidence for infrastructure, tearing up contracts, for instance, for Melbourne's East-West Tunnel is a confidence destroyer. All the overseas investors are saying.
Oh, but your point there assumes that the cost-benefit analysis was independent and transparent, and it clearly wasn't. And also, if we want to, so when we talk about it, that's exactly proof of how to do the process wrong by the last government. What you need to do is to have an infrastructure plan which isn't just a Liberal Premier trying to hang on to office or someone in Labor trying to argue vote for Labor. What we need is something which is above politics. What Australians want is long-term vision, not short-term political debates. What I'm doing this morning is saying to people who want to know what Labor stands for, the Commonwealth Government has some levers at its disposal. Proper lifelong investment in education, proper processes for deciding infrastructure. Then you get to the question of healthcare. Healthcare is not just a social justice, it's not just a safety mechanism policy, it's also something which enhances the productivity of the nation. If you've got good primary care, if people aren't discouraged from seeing their GP, if people are able to use universally accessible Medicare, that is a more efficient way to promote the health of the nation than having a system which encourages you to end up going to hospitals or emergency departments or more inefficient systems.
All of which is easy to talk about. Again, it's very hard to understand exactly how you would propose to pay for better healthcare, better education. I mean, this is pretty much what Tony Abbott did as well. And people are sick of politicians over-promising, then under-delivering. We're sick of the lack of bipartisanship on what is obviously good nation-building policy. We're sick of some of this tit-for-tat. Now I'm in power, I'm going to punish the people who came before me. We want to see someone, and whether that's you or not, we're still wondering, we want to see someone who knows where to take the country.
Well, John, you asked about 3 or 4 questions/statements there. What I'm doing this morning is I'm explaining to your listeners that the Labor I lead is thinking about the long term. What are the things, what are the policies that the Commonwealth Government, that if Labor was to form a government, would do? And I'm going through one by one.
Sure, and you can promise everything fundamentally again and again and again, and I've asked you many times, how do you pay for it?
I will come to that, but I'm just...
Well, why don't you do that now?
Because you made 3 points. One is people don't want tit-for-tat, bipartisanship. They just don't want to hear what you would say promises. They want to know detail. What I'm doing here is articulating what Labor stands for, because I think at the start of the show, that's what you were saying. What does Labor stand for? If we get to the issue of bipartisanship, it is frustrating dealing with the Abbott government in terms of bipartisanship, because...
They didn't start the tit-for-tat. Your people started. It goes back as far as anyone can remember.
Let's talk straight here. This government's budget last year, on one hand people say you should be bipartisan. On the other hand, have a look at the measures they're bringing in. $100,000 degrees, cutting the pension, and tax on the sick. How can you be bipartisan about rotten ideas? Now, there are issues that we are prepared to be bipartisan on. National security.
NDIS is the only one that comes to mind in recent times.
Okay, well, there's the disability insurance scheme, but there's also national security. If you look at their legislation, they've presented legislation to the Parliament a number of times We've modified and improved it, and then we've been able to vote for it. We've offered bipartisanship in terms of constitutional recognition of Indigenous Australians. 2 weeks ago, we announced that we believe there should be a national political push in terms of tackling family violence, and the Prime Minister's agreed to meet with me to talk about how we can implement that. So on constitutional recognition, we're up for bipartisanship. On national security, our record's there. The National Disability Insurance Scheme. When we talk about renewable energy, we think the government's trashing it, but we are prepared to, again, keep sitting down with the government to rescue renewable energy in this country. So there's a range of bipartisanship. It doesn't sell newspapers like conflict.
OK, let's get to taxes. Where are the tax increases going to come from?
Well, first of all, the government said that they're going to have a Federation tax white paper. We want to see what they're going to say there, and we're prepared to be open-minded and see what the ideas they come up with.
Are you going to end some, or would you end some of what are called middle-class welfare or concessions to superannuation, negative gearing and the like?
Well, again, you've got 3 questions there. Let's take each of them in order. In terms of what you would call middle-class welfare, when it's come to better targeted means testing in terms of family payments, Labor did that in government, and we've also voted for some of the changes that the government has sought to make when we've been in opposition. Again, it doesn't get the sort of coverage in the media that perhaps we think it should, but we voted for some of the government changes. We've supported a range of their changes, which we think are sustainable and not unfair and not broken election promises. So we do support better targeting and means testing. Then you look at then you also raise various tax concessions and various matters.
Well, there's billions and billions of dollars of gap between expenditure and revenue, and we're told not just the intergenerational...
And that's where we leave the opposition leader, Bill Shorten, speaking to John Fain on 774 Melbourne. It's time now to take a closer look at some of the week's big talking points.
Joining us now for the Friday Confab is Jamila Rizvi, who's the editor of Mamma Mia, and also Forms columnist and author Margie Worrell. Nice to see you both.